to talk about kind of what my expectation is for a thesis paragraph right now. So what I'd like you to do is you should have grabbed a sheet as you were coming in. If you did not, grab one now. I'd like you to particularly focus on where it says thesis types. Particularly where it says thesis types. Read that. Okay. And then listen. You have all your music playing, so we'll have to choose one. Yes. We collaborate.
Wow. Try to finish first test we took doesn't be the boss. Okay, we look for this first class. No, this is
How is everybody on this Friday Eve? It's Friday Eve. Friday Eve. So, the night before something. Okay. Tomorrow's Friday. It's Friday Eve. Only one more wake up that you have to do. Right? So, anyone doing anything interesting this weekend? This weekend? Today? Oh, we didn't know this. Well, guess what we're gonna have to do? All right, so, everybody, we've got to sing with a swing, because it don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. Okay, so, Nicole's. Okay, so, a one, a one, a 1, 2, 3, and happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nicole. Happy birthday to you and many more. So birthday celebration, what are we doing? What's your family gonna do? They're gonna outstanding, fabulous. They're just going all out. Dinner. Dinner's good. Dinner's good. Cake. I got ice cream cake. You think you get ice cream cake? Right. But they're Libra too, so very good. Let's keep things balanced. All right. So, anybody else doing anything amazing besides celebrating their birth? Good. No. Football game. Who are you playing? You need. We beat them, right? Yeah. Okay. So so let's do that again. Almost got a job at UD. Dodged a bullet. Okay. Anyway, so. No, they were going to be so evil. So when it was way back when pterodactyls were flying, they were changing schools from being junior highs to middle schools, and I taught 9th grade. And so the high schools were required to take the 9th grade teachers. But then we went to 9th grade, we went to the 9th grade meeting, and they said, yeah, but we're not going to teach world history in 9th grade. So we have to take you, but next year we're not actually teaching what you teach. So second semester, we're going to let you go. So it's like, you have to hire me, but you basically already promised to fire me. So I went back to my middle school, and someone at my school volunteered to teach 6th grade, so I could teach 8th grade. So I stayed at Emerson until this job, which turned out to be good. So things work out. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Right. So, but uni, they're mean, so I don't like that. Anyway, so besides beating uni, what else? Anything else going on? Alright, so what? Homecoming soon. Okay, we got a wee bit of time. Homecoming is the week of 10/17 through 10/21. That's your preview as to our spirit days that we're going to be doing. These are not in stone yet. And do not forget, you guys know where the homecoming dance is going to be? Do you know what that is? Okay. Skyspace, it's like, it used to be the tallest building west of the Mississippi River, but the Wilshire building, they put a spire on it so that the spire thing is now taller. But you basically look down at the top of the Wilshire building and then see the spire coming up. So you're actually taller. I've been toying with ideas. Is it the highest homecoming? That doesn't sound good. Highest homecoming. That has connotations there. So I know it may be legal in a couple days after that. I don't know. But, so what do you think of ideas? You know, city lights, stars, stars come out. I don't know, we'll figure it out. Okay.
Elevated video.
Most elevated, okay. All right, okay. So, anyone planning on going? The sky slide, do you know what the sky slide is? A glass slide from the 70th to the 69th floor. So you're like out there, it's like, yeah. No, it's not going to break.
That would be one of my things.
That would be, but it wouldn't happen.
You never know. How did I hear it?
All right. So, on your sheet, could someone read for me where it says sample question? Someone read where it says sample question? Sample question. Thank you, Ricky.
To what extent did the Civil War not constitute a revolution of American society?
Okay, so you're taking a test, and either for the LEQ, now known as the long essay question, or this could even have been a DBQ. That's the question. And last time I gave you a rubric that talked about how much a thesis is worth, and how many thesis points can you get? You can get up to 2. You can get up to 2. And what I want to do today is tell you what you need to do to basically be able to get that 2 points, or 2 out of 7, like 27% of the points you need on the DBQ. Okay, so this is good. So first of all, what not to do. So could someone go, see where it says thesis types? Zachy had hand up a moment ago. Could you read for me where number 1 under thesis types, both the example and then the analysis?
Alright. Simple thesis. The Civil War was a revolution in American society. Rating 4. Thesis is far too simplistic. It contains no partition or analysis.
Yeah. What did they do? What did the person who, let's say someone wrote that thesis, what did they simply do as far as, Natalie, what did they do? Yeah, they restated the question. Does that mean that their brain actually, if we had put some sort of brain scanning device on their head, would any activity have actually register in the time that they wrote down that? No, he didn't do anything. On instructions given to graders, that will not get you a single point. Okay? So it may have worked back in 8th grade when just having a nice long paragraph was sometimes enough for your teacher to smile. It doesn't work anymore. Who could read number 2? Natalie, thank you.
Complex, simple thesis. In some respects, Americans experienced profound changes during the war. After the war, it was clear that society had also been changed dramatically in a number of important areas. Tourism was there. The analytical aspect of the thesis is constant. However, no partition is established. The thesis does not establish how American society was changed by the war.
Okay, so let's put that brain scanning device back on our heads, and it might have gotten a slight little beep, because there was a little thought that happened there. They took the word revolution and they turned it into what? What did they recognize that revolution had changed? And so obviously there was a thought. Yay! Thought. But if you're, and so what I would say is that this one might be enough, depending on, let's say that'd probably be enough that you could get the 1 out of this video. There's actually some thought of a thesis going on. And so you might be able to pull off the 1 point here. But what is it still lacking? What time here at Pali High, there's been a basic idea on how to write a thesis called BAR.
Argument roadmap.
What's the part that's most missing here?
Roadmap.
The roadmap. Okay, I like your point about argument because I think that that's formulating your arguments is your roadmap, but it's the roadmap that's really missing there. You're not giving a direction. And so if you look at the rubric, to get that second point, it says that your paper has to be thesis driven. Well, to drive somewhere, what do you need? A map. Okay? So basically so think about it. That's required. Okay, Brendan, what,
Should the thesis be one like sentence?
not necessarily. Not anymore. Your thesis, the germ of the idea might be in one sentence, but in order to create a proper thesis statement, it may have to be more lengthy.
Okay.
Okay? Zach, do you want to handle number 3, or do you have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
It's kind of related to the thesis.
Uh-huh.
If you don't get a point for your introductory paragraph, you have to write
It's
one.
it's not a point for introductory paragraph, but it is a point for thesis.
But if you just
So what is the most convenient place to place a thesis?
But I mean, like, can you just write your thesis as your introductory paragraph and then move on? And
they may give you the thesis point, but you're lacking anything driving your essay. And so you're losing an opportunity to do several things. Background could fill on your outside information. You could be providing the overall context for your essay. So even though it's not expressly saying introductory paragraph point, introductory paragraph gives you a place to put so many cool things that to not do it would be foolish. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so now, could you read for me number 3?
Sure. Simple split thesis. The Civil War was a revolution in America, politically, socially, and constitutionally. Writing there. Thesis provides a partition, politics, society, and the Constitution. Thesis lacks an explanation and general analysis in each of the 3 areas in the partition. Note, this thesis would be a separate thesis if the question already contained the partition.
So basically what the person did here is someone probably told them at one point in their lives that when someone says society, you should almost automatically create categories of political, social, economic. And so they took that minor brain activity and they applied it to the question. But for the most part, all they did with the question, again, is restating, or for the thesis is they restated the question. And that's not enough. So they said fair, I might not give it the point. Okay? The only one that I would have given a point so far really would have been number 2. Do you want to do number 4 for me, or do you have a question? Okay.
So if we do bar, we're gonna do 2 points.
Okay. If you do bar, you're going to get 2 points. Hold that thought. Okay, so let's read 4 first. Okay? Because it's sort of an answer to your question, but I'm going to throw out a second question to you.
I'm gonna
By all means.
you said the outside information
Perhaps as background. So can you do 4? All right.
complex to the thesis. Politically, the war established the supremacy of the Republican Party in national politics for much of the next 50 years. Socially, the war caused significant gains in African American rights. And constitutionally, the war established the supremacy of the federal government over the states. Thus, the Civil War did not in fact represent a political, social, and constitutional revolution in America. Rating
So why? Why is the rating superior? Why is the rating superior?
I think there was like in the category generally funded was the highest citation, and then I also had, like, analysis on why they chose those questions.
Yeah. And so, and you've set up your arguments. And so that's the part of the bar, the A part, the arguing part, you're setting it up. Now, why am I not guaranteeing that just if you wrote a thesis this good, that you would get the second point? What still would need to happen in your paper that, in order for you to get that second point? Yeah. Yeah, expand on it, which means that you're actually using it. So it's not enough to just simply state the thesis. You have to then use the thesis to drive your paper. And so what you could do, if you're just trying this out, you shouldn't be just for the first time trying this out, but if you are, what you would basically be doing is almost taking those 3 different arguments that are stated and turning them into your topic sentences, and then supporting those topic sentences with information. Then your paper is thesis driven. If you made that set of arguments and then in effect talked about something else, or you didn't use them to control your paper, you still don't get the second point. Does that make sense?
You just have to use it.
You have to use it. So it's not only doing it, it's using it. Okay, so it's do a roadmap and use the roadmap. It's not enough to have the map in your trunk. Okay, you have to actually take the map out and utilize it. Yes.
So if you have an thesis, but you run out of time, and so you write 2 of your body paragraphs, would you be able to get the second thesis point?
That's a good question. I think you would, because you were utilizing it and technically you were using it to drive your paper. Does that make sense? So it's as if you're abandoning it totally and starting to write about Captain Nemo. That you're going to get yourself in trouble. Okay, but running out of time is always a dicey thing. And what you try and do is just get as much stuff in, as possible. Am I putting in context? Am I putting in outside information and get as many points as you can? All right. Okay, so circle number 4. And I was going to say goal, but I don't want you to put it as your goal. I want you to put that this is your requirement. Your requirement is to hit this mark as far as your thesis is concerned. That you are doing a complex split thesis. And the reason why is because most questions are going to have levels of complexity where within each body paragraph there's going to be different levels of meeting your thesis. Everything is not going to be equal because nothing is that simple. All right? Any questions, comments, or concerns? All right. So, before we get into that, I wanted to. It was on the agenda as you came in, but the one in the PowerPoint doesn't contain it, so I want to make sure that you saw it. We are going to have a kind of a mid-unit quiz in this unit. It's going to be for chapters 9 and 10, and maybe the first section in 11. I will clarify that later. But I will give you a hint. Book, bold-faced terms. Would you like the hint again? Book, bold-faced terms. So it's chapters 9 and 10, book. And then in those chapters that are the bold-faced terms, make sure you don't just study them as far as just learning them. You'll want to know their context. You'll want to know kind of their importance level beyond just a straight definition. Or if they change the words on you, you won't understand. Does graduation. It is on for y'all on the 17th. So you're ahead of the odd period, so you don't get to lean on the odd people to get information. Can you imagine somebody doing something like that? Now,
Basic and constant, what was the,
we're not going to be asked.
I already told you it.
Oh, you're not. Oh, you already told me about this.
I did.
Oh, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so yeah, since we talked, you're fine. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
Do we get a rubric on the test? Or can we get the rubric?
Oh, for writing your DBQ? Absolutely. I was going absolutely and shaking my head. Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
What was the quiz you mentioned here?
Ish.
Okay.
Ish. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Anything more? So, now, by the way, you're going, quiz. I'm looking at it as quiz. And the reason why is two. One, our main homework is reading. People have a tendency to go, I'll do it later. You know, since it's not something that you actually have to, I can't do a brain scan to see if you're actually reading. I need to get you to be reading, because if you put all your reading off to right before the test, you're going to be toast on the test. Secondly, a few of you showed on the last test that you don't quite have the knack yet for the stimulus-based questions. I'm confident, because I've seen this process now 2 straight years, that people get it, but they don't necessarily get it the first time or the second time. And so I wanted to give an opportunity of a non-stimulus-based test or quiz for you to kind of put some insurance points in your bank, just until you get the knack, if that makes sense. Yes?
When you said or know the full
Boldface.
terms,
That's a hint.
know the context.
Yeah.
What do you mean by like?
So don't just go and go for a straight definition. Okay? You have more of an understanding. Does that make sense? Okay. Good. Yes?
Can you have both these terms
In
in the textbook?
the textbook. Okay. Are we good? Okay, so next time there is an entrance ticket, what I'm going to ask you to do is today we're going to talk about the presidency of a guy by the name of Andy Jackson. But I'm going to leave to you the application of Jackson's ideas to what happens in the United States Supreme Court under a Jacksonian Chief Justice by the name of Roger Taney, and the impact of Jacksonian ideas on state constitutions. So what I want you to do for the entrance ticket is demonstrate an understanding for the concepts of this change that happens in American democracy, and then be able to give examples of that change in the Taney Court and in state governments. Okay, does that make sense? All right. I saw somebody, did anyone need an image? Are we good? All right. Yeah, I'm sure you don't want me in the image. That's right, so, when last we met, one of the last things we did is we elected a guy by the name of John Quincy Adams as President of the United States. Now, John Quincy Adams, he is an Adams, so he's a member of the Adams family, right? He's also a son of a Federalist, okay? And being the son of a Federalist, it's going to affect him in his attitudes. So he took office in March of 1825, and the main reason I put that there is just to timeline it for you. But if you're going to describe the nature of John Quincy Adams, basically think kind of aristocratic. If I said that you had an aristocratic nature, what would I be saying about you? Isabel, what,
Maybe rich and refined, all information background.
Okay, so definitely we might be talking about how that would have been created, being enriched by going to college and having information. But how about taking that and now putting it into your attitude? So I think you're absolutely right that that might help create the attitude, but how does the attitude express itself? Yeah.
You feel superior. Or
It
like,
feels superior, and then how would that look to other people? How, yeah, he looks elitist. He's going, I'm smarter than you. It's like whispering it under his breath and stuff like that. And how does that come off? Yeah, it comes off a little arrogant. And so he was not warm and fuzzy. Okay? You didn't go, oh, JQ! Jaquan! Wow! Okay? He's not that guy. Alright? However, just because he acted that way, it did not make him necessarily wrong. Like, if you were taking some of the big issues of the day, and then mainly maybe applying our modern beliefs about those issues of the day, you would be going, hey, he was actually closer to what I might think. For instance, he supported American Indian rights over states' rights. He would be somebody that if the state of, let's say, Georgia, went to a group of American Indians, let's say known as the Creeks, and said, hey, I want your land, he would say, state of Georgia, you have no business taking the land away from the Creeks. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Anyway, just want to make sure so you have this in your brain. A, he's elitist and arrogant, but it did not necessarily make him wrong. Got it? But it did make him unpopular. Now, John Quincy Adams will make what I call the national proposal, okay? And if you look at this, last time I very quickly kind of dropped in the notes in the election of 1824 that Henry Clay supported this thing known as the American system, which was an expansion of building roads, canals, banking, higher tariff. Well, if you look at what John Quincy Adams was in favor of, it was very close to what Henry Clay believed in. The two end up actually being very, very, very close politically. They both would have been what were known as national Republicans. Now, what John Quincy Adams basically called for was the creation of a national university. Think of it as a university that would train people to learn how to do good government. Okay, imagine that. So people learning how to do good government. We may need that now. But it would be a nationally, it would be part of the United States government to have this training thing. The creation of a national observatory. Imagine the federal government taking on science, okay, and elevating it as actually important. Imagine that, okay. Internal improvements. The national government building roads. The national government building canals. Now, as we know, who ended up actually doing that task? The states actually ended up doing this task. But John Quincy Adams, also like Henry Clay, thought that it should be the federal government that goes in and builds a road goes in and builds a canal. But when John Quincy Adams or Henry Clay says we ought to do this, states go, oh no! Don't build a road in our state. That's too much power. Okay. Adams also wanted to give banking more power. As it stood now, we had a Bank of the United States that could regulate currency by basically saying that if a bank, okay, printed too much money, so Maxine, your bank prints money. You just every day you just fire up the printing press. What the Bank of the United States could do is, if your money got deposited at the Bank of the United States, they could say, okay, I want that in gold, please. And if Maxine's bank did not have the gold to back it up, but buy Maxine's bank. What John Quincy Adams wanted was a stricter thing, where we basically create a more uniform currency. Maybe the bank being the thing that prints all the money, almost like we have now. So he's basically kind of ahead of his time. Well, John Quincy Adams. Have you ever heard of the Midas touch? What's the Midas touch? What's the Midas touch? It turns to gold. Okay. John Quincy Adams had the reverse Midas touch. Okay. John Quincy Adams says, "I want it," and Congress goes, "Ew! Yeah, oh man, that turns it." And just think of something gross. Okay. On almost everything that John Quincy Adams wants, he don't get. Okay. It was like the reverse Midas touch. So this brings us to 1828, and in 1828, we are going to have an election that's partly a rematch. The National Republicans are going to nominate John Quincy Adams for a second term, and when they nominate him, basically they're going to go all in attacking attacking Andrew Jackson as a candidate. They are going to look at Andrew Jackson and they are basically going to try and paint him as completely unqualified for the presidency. If you think that the nasty campaign that we have today was bad, it's nothing compared to what was happening in 1828. If you look here at the top, this was a handout that they would give at if you were at a anti-Jackson rally. And what it was called was the coffin handbill. And what each of those coffins basically symbolizes somebody that Andy Jackson personally killed. Yes, he personally killed this many people. He was someone that, if you look at him funny, I'm gonna see you on the field. Let's duel, man. He killed several people in duels. He once took on two brothers in duels, and that's the only time that he took a bullet in one of these duels, and it was too close to a vital organ. So it ended up being something that the lead kept poisoning him, and he would start abscessing, okay, every now and again. It made it so that he could barely hold down his food. He was 6'2", but he was only 150 pounds. And the main way that he basically kept any food down is he just basically ate beef and drank whiskey. Okay? Anyway. Adams and his people also will say that Jackson, they said that his mom was a prostitute. Okay. They said that his wife was an adulteress. Okay. Which was actually true. But it was from a long time ago. Okay, so Jackson's now basically closing in on 70 as far as his age. Back when he was in his 20s, so we're talking like almost 50 years before, there was this woman in Nashville by the name of Rachel Robards. Okay? And Rachel Robards, her husband did not treat her well at all. Okay? Really poorly. And basically, what would happen is every time her husband would go off traveling, and he did that a lot, Rachel Robards would seek comfort and solace with Andy Jackson. One time, Robards did not come back. And so Andy and Rachel are kind of hanging out some more. And finally, they decide to get married. Now you might note that there was a small step that was missing in this story. A lack of a divorce. And so yes, she was married technically to Andy Jackson and Robards at the same time. Now eventually Robards will divorce her. But here now 50 years later, the Adams campaign is digging up these two documents, divorce and marriage certificate, and obviously they are in the wrong order. Well, here's the thing. Jackson and Rachel, they did this back when they were young. You know, you make mistakes when you're young, right? Okay. Here they are now, a little bit older, and Rachel is now high society. Okay? She is like the Queen of Nashville. And how do you think the Queen of Nashville feels, okay, now that these old marriage certificates and things like that are being passed all around town? Very upset. So upset that she gets sick. And between the date of the election and the date of the next presidential inauguration, she dies. Now, have I given any sort of impression about Andy Jackson as being any sort of a forgiving guy? And so he is going to blame these people for the rest of his life. Okay? He does not like National Republicans. Anyway, what Jackson basically does is we now are having a second party system emerge. Now, before 1824, we had one party with all of those candidates. Now we are actually going to have two parties. The National Republicans and Adams are one team, and what Andy Jackson calls the democracy is the other team. We call the democracy today the Democratic Party. So Andy Jackson is one of the founding fathers for the Democratic Party. That is why he is currently, not for long, but currently on the $20 bill, because of this founding role in the Democratic Party. The co-founder was the guy who's going to serve as his Secretary of State and later his Vice President, a guy by the name of Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren is really kind of the brains of the operation. Jackson is, I'm the hero of the Battle of Nolens, vote for me. Van Buren is the guy with the plan. And what the plan was is that they're going to revive the old Jeffersonian ideals. They're going to say, hey, remember when it was cool to farm? It's cool to farm again. You know, and you who hold your crafts are so important, the artisans, we are for you. For the mechanics, for the people who are building things with their hands, we are for you. We are the party of the common people. Okay? But as they are making this pitch, a pitch which is basically attacking the aristocracy, it's seeking to get rid of all of the distinctions of rank in American society, Martin Van Buren figured something out. This alone would not win. If it were just an election in the North, they would win. But in Southern society, the emergence of common man power had not yet emerged. Who ruled the South? Plantation owners. And basically, what these guys figured out was that even if they could win in the North, they couldn't win so much in the North that they could win a presidential election without the South. So they basically come up with a scheme, a coalition, but it's kind of like a coalition that makes almost no sense. And basically what they do is they approach the plantation owners and say, hey, what can we do to get your support? And obviously, what do plantation owners, what's the key to their happiness? What do they want to make sure that nobody messes with in order to gain their support? Slavery. So basically, what these common man Democrats do is they make a deal of the damned. Okay, they basically say, hey, in order for us to have our common man coolness in the North, we are basically going to ignore the issue of slavery in the South. They know that common man stuff had not come up yet. No, that wasn't really working in the South yet. The plantation owners are in control. And to win at the national level, they need that Southern support. So they basically, in order for us to have our cool thing, we're accepting slavery. So it's a coalition of diverse interests. They are absolutely not on the same page. I mean, talking about freedom stuff is what your thing is, except for when we talk about the South. And then in the South, it's the plantation owners and it's slavery. Even though the two sides don't make sense together, it wins. And imagine that's really the reason why you do it, right? People are able to look the other way on a lot of things. If looking the other way allows you to do what? Win. And most of the elections of this era will be this weird combination of common man democracy and plantation owners. It starts in 1828 with Andy Jackson crushing John Quincy Adams in the election. It turns John Quincy Adams into America's second one-term president. The first, of course, being his daddy. All right. Any questions on this? Do you kind of understand what happened here? All right. So, very quickly, I'm going to read to you. This is a primary source, and what I want you to do is usually I'd have you read a primary source, but instead I'm going to read the primary source to you. And while I'm reading it to you, I want you to look at the picture, because what I talk about at the end of the primary source happens. This is the picture of it. Okay, so this is your visual of it, and then I want you to listen. And while you are listening, jot down anything, any sort of context, anything as far as point of view. You are basically analyzing the primary source as you listen. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So, first of all, I have to find the primary source. I've buried it somewhere. I am sure. So, the only context I'll give to you, I'll give you this. This primary source is written by a woman by the name of Margaret Bayard Smith. And she was a socialite in Washington, D.C. from the time of the Jeffersonians all the way through Jackson. Okay? So that's who she is. This is what she writes. Thousands and thousands of people without distinction of rank collected in an immense mass around the Capitol. They stood silently, orderly, and tranquil, with their eyes fixed on the front of that building, waiting for the president to appear. Finally, preceded by marshals and surrounded by the judges of the Supreme Court, the president advanced and bowed to the people. They greeted him with shouts that shook the air. Cannons from Alexandria and Fort Warburton fired salutes. It was grand. It was sublime. A breathless silence soon followed as the crowd listened to hear the sound of his voice. After reading his speech, the oath of office was administered to him by the Chief Justice. The president then bowed again to the people. Had the day ended then, even Europeans would have been impressed by the majesty of the silent and tranquil crowd. Unfortunately, that was not. By 10 o'clock, the streets and avenues were crowded with carriages, wagons, and with women and children, some in finery, and some in rags. For it was the people's president, and all would see him. We were informed that the crowd in front of the president's house had diminished, and that we might be able to enter the reception that was being held there. But what a scene did we witness. The majesty of the people had disappeared, and a mob of men, women, and children and a mob of men, women, and children scrambled and romped through the house. What a pity. No arrangements had been made. No police officers were on duty, and the whole house was full of the mob. The president, after having almost been torn to pieces by people eager to shake his hand, had retreated through a back door to his lodgings at a hotel. Thousands of dollars worth of glass and china had been broken in the rush for refreshments. Ladies fainted, men quarreled, and such a scene of confusion took place that it's impossible to describe. Finally, the windows were thrown open, and the crowd rushed through them onto the lawn. This turn of events had not been anticipated. Only ladies and gentlemen had been expected at the occasion, not the people en masse. But it was the people's day, and the people's president, and the people would rule. Look at the picture. Think of what I just read. What analysis? So write just something. Something. What point of view? What context? Who's she talking to? Tell us something. So stop. Okay, so high numbers? No, we'll just do some random one, just where. Okay. Oh, hush. Okay. All right, so. Okay, so Cindy. Anything at all, any thoughts? Excellent. Okay, let's stop there. That was really good. It's a really great start. Okay. 29. So Alex. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's such a long run and there's such a strong opposition to the other parties that was less, I guess, more elitist and stuff, but the bigger and the
does seem surprised, and almost more than that. Almost more than that, yeah. Yeah, she's horrified. Okay. Any last thoughts? Yeah.
Well, yeah, 'cause she said like it said something about like this like great whatever would have like impressed Europe or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And she proceeded to say she's like, but like it didn't. It was like chaotic and like messy.
Yeah. So it's like, all right. Sarah, what was your?
Well, I thought she like was very encouraging of like the idea of democracy, and she like found it to be very organized and kind of like appalling in the sense that like no one was really organized anything or like set any rules or standards to who went into the White House.
Very well said. Yeah.
I just thought it was kind of like the way that it was structured and everything, like in the beginning it was like really nice and like you wanted to go like European mayor sort of thing. And then towards the end it just kind of became like a mess. So I was like, whoa, that's crazy, and like just like Sarah said, like there was no order and it was just like a giant mess. But like I thought it was interesting how she had mentioned that like there was like no distinction, like all of the classes were there basically.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the inauguration, probably back then, would have been like maybe the upper class and like the lower class didn't necessarily have a say. So like I feel like Jackson really appealed to all people.
Yeah. So that the first part reminds me. I was at this inauguration. Okay. And they were playing music, and the entire thing was on big jumbotrons. And right before the inauguration, they were blasting this music, and like everybody's like dancing. It's like dancing with your closest 100,000 friends. But that type of thing, I just kind of felt that you know there, all those people without rank, without distinction, everything like that, so impressive. But then she turned around and not so impressed. Yeah.
So in the beginning, she made herself a scientist out, and she called them like child environment professors. But then she started calling them mad.
She
Yeah, she
distanced
did.
herself,
And then
didn't
she
she?
like, I thought we would be inside the end, but like the mob ended.
Yeah. So again, there was an attitude thing, Melissa. Okay, you guys did amazing. That's exactly what I want you to be able to do with primary sources. Figure out that context. Figure out that point of view, and that is more what they want you to be able to do with primary sources, as opposed to just telling what's in it. It's telling what it means. Does that make sense? And so that's the skill I want you guys to be able to hone in this class. All right, so 3 stories if I can get them done, okay? One kind of really fun story, one, and it's banking. And the third, if we can get to it, is the reason why people are confused as to why Andy Jackson was ever on the $20 bill, okay? Anyway, so when Jackson takes office, we sometimes call it the Revolution of 1828. Much like in 1800, what happened is you have a change of one group is in power, and now they're not. Whereas Thomas Jefferson was about the more peaceful transfer of power, keeping a lot of things the same as you destroy everything else. Jackson, nothing. We're getting rid of everything. He called it rotation in office. And the biggest change he's going to make is the people. Think of every job in the federal government, like postal carriers, people who collect tariffs, everybody, you're fired. Someone would like to do that. But now that they've all been fired, the new guy gets to replace them all. In fact, for about 50 years, this was one of the biggest roles that the President of the United States had, was handing out jobs at the beginning of his or her administration. Okay? There are literally lines going down Pennsylvania Avenue. People basically thinking that they should be appointed to office because they helped get somebody elected. Now, what did you do? Some people, they gave speeches. Some people campaigned. Other people, the way that they showed their support, show me the money. And so if Benjamin did a huge donation to Andy Jackson, Jackson goes, "Yay, thank you." You are now the ambassador to Bolivia. Okay? Basically, they would hand out jobs based on the amount of help you were in getting someone elected. The problem is that if you bought your office with support or money, the expectation is that to keep it, what do you have to keep doing? You're supporting, you keep giving money. So therefore, if I ask your opinion on something, what are you most likely to tell me? You are amazing. That was the best idea I ever heard. I haven't heard it yet, but whatever you say, don't say it. It's awesome. And what Jackson found is that he could not necessarily trust the advice of the people that he appoints to positions around him because they all agreed with him. So what Jackson ended up doing is he had to create unofficial advisors who sometimes literally met in his kitchen. And so mockingly, people start calling them the kitchen cabinet. Okay? Now, Jackson, as far as his style, even though he is a Democrat, and he believes that he is elected because it's the will of the people, he believes that now once in power, he actually embodies that will. That you elected me, so therefore everything I do is because you elected me. So therefore I can do pretty much what? Anything. And he basically starts to behave in a way, a rule, which is I'm in charge. And if you don't like it, well, go win an election, and maybe you can do it today. You can do it someday too. If the Supreme Court made a decision that he did not like, he just basically ignored it. Because did anybody elect anybody to the Supreme Court? No. So why should they have any sort of say? Nobody elected them. Only people that are elected should be allowed to have a say. He used the veto often. 12 times was more than all of his predecessors combined. And not only did he use it a lot, he used it differently. James Madison, when he used the veto, he did it on an internal improvement. He thought that it was unconstitutional for the federal government to build a road within his state, within another state. And he basically said, change the Constitution and this will be fine. Jackson, when he vetoed something, it's, I don't like you, I don't like your laws, I am just vetoing it because I'm not feeling it today. He was using it as a thing of what? Power. Okay? People are horrified. You shouldn't be using it this way. And so what they start to do is they start referring to him as King Andrew, or if they're particularly surly, they start calling him King Mob. You're the mob. You're the living mob. Okay? This was a political cartoon calling him King Andrew I, born to command, of veto memory. And where is he standing? Can anyone read what he's standing on? The Constitution of the United States. Eventually, the National Republican Party decides to change its name. And its name is a reaction to Andy Jackson. What they call themselves now are the Whigs. Now there's a reason. In England, you have two parties. You have the party that's for the king, the Tories. Yes, king. We love you, king. Whoa, king. And then you have the party that is against the king. No king, business. We like business better. The party that was anti-king were the Whigs. So basically following that model, saying that Andy Jackson is behaving like a king, the Whigs, okay, the National Republicans, call themselves Whigs. Did you get it? Yeah. You get it? Okay. All right, any questions on this? Do you see what happened here? Okay, so 3 stories. one is about a tariff. Now, the background, so this is your background, so you know how when you write an essay, you do your background first? Say, this is your background. In 1828, Jackson's not president yet. It's still the presidency of John Quincy Adams. And what will happen is the Congress will pass a 45% tariff. Think about it. On every imported goods, a tax of 45%. Now, this is a huge tariff. It's a giant tariff. You know, the reason they're able to get it passed is they tell some Democrats in some in northern states that they'll also put a protection on things like wool, a raw material. And the only reason they're putting it on those materials is they want particular congressional districts to vote in favor of this base tariff. But it's very clear. This tariff favors the North. Northern manufacturing, northern raw materials, all North, all the time, northern channel. So, if it favors the North, guess who's not happy? South. Okay. The South is hurt by the tariff. They say this tariff is abominable. It is a tariff of abominations. A tariff of abominations. What they basically argue is that the tariff gave the central government too much power. Here's the argument. Here they are, one region, which is adversely affected by this tariff. And as a region, all of these states can do nothing about it. So Congress can basically pass any law, right, without the South's permission. Now, obviously, they're upset about the tariff, but there is a subtext here. Okay, subtext. You guys understand what subtext is? Okay? The story that's kind of hidden. And what subtext is that if you can mess with the South on the issue of slavery, of the tariff, you're going to be able to mess with them on other issues as well. Possibly slavery. Okay? So even though the argument is taking place on the football field of the tariff, what's in the back of people's mind is slavery. There is a slavery subtext here. Does that make sense? And can you see, this is not a lead. Okay? This is southern states terrified about their way of life. So, at the time, do you guys remember back in the election of 1824, there were 5 guys who were running for president. One dropped out as far as running for president, ran for vice president instead, unopposed. That was John C. Calhoun. Now that is John C. Calhoun. Take a look at him. Anytime I take a look at John C. Calhoun, I get terrified. Does anyone else get terrified when they look at John C. Calhoun? I find it absolutely frightening. So John C. Calhoun, as Vice President of the United States, is going to write a critique of the tariff. It was known as the South Carolina Exposition. He writes it anonymously because he is Vice President. He thinks it's uncool for the Vice President to be attacking the government. Later, he owns up to it. Anyway, what South Carolina Expedition did is it attacked the tariff as unconstitutional and unjust. That it is unjust that the federal government could pass a law that particularly targets one region, the South. Okay? So, what he says is that a state or a region should have a way of defending itself against these types of attacks. And what that thing would be, the doctrine of nullification. It sounds so cool, okay? What they basically would do is that if a law is passed that is particularly odious to a state or a region, what that state could do is zap it, okay? Nullify. I nullify you, okay? Nullify you, all right? So everybody imagine that if this were a power of the states today, imagine, let's say there was like a state government that did not like something like Obamacare. Imagine that. And what they could basically do is they could just zap it, and it would no longer be relevant in their state. And if you have a whole bunch of states doing this, what basically happens to that federal law? It does not exist. Anyway, this doctrine nullification, I'm not going to give John C. Calhoun an A here because he did not come up with this idea all on his own. He stole it from someone. Does anyone know who he stole it from? Who you steal it from? So, not so much John Locke, but someone stole something from John Locke, who turns out to be the same person, okay, that John C. Calhoun is talking, who John C. Calhoun steals from. It's Jefferson. Okay, so you're on the right road, but it's Jefferson. Do you guys remember the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? In the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, they basically proposed that states should ought to be able to do something. What Calhoun is doing is saying the thing. Nullification. Got it? Anyway. All right, so we're now in 1832. In 1832, Jackson is now president. John C. Calhoun is still vice president, but he is now vice president for Jackson instead of Adams. That's kind of weird. Anyway, by this time, Congress has learned its lesson a little. 45% is a little high. So they pass a tariff. It's still high. It's just no longer 45%. So in the minds of Congress, they did, hey, we reduced the tariff. Everybody should be happy. But in the eyes of South Carolina, it is still too high. And so what South Carolina does is they go, babe, we warned you. You know, we had this whole exposition and everything. And what South Carolina does is they vote to declare the tariff of 1832 to be null and void. Federal government, take your stinking tariff and go home. We don't do tariffs here. You have a state that is basically vowing that they absolutely will not follow federal law publicly. Andrew Jackson, this is your George Washington moment. Okay? When G-Wash was faced with a similar situation, okay? Bunch of whiskey rebels, okay? They didn't want to follow the whiskey tax. What did George Washington, in his George Washington moment, do? What was his reaction to whiskey rebels? What did he do? He marched in what? Army. Okay, wait a minute here. Is this just a bunch of whiskey rebels? It's a state. Okay. Well, Jackson will make a proclamation known as the Nullification Proclamation. He declares that making this statement that you will not follow federal law by practicing what was known as nullification is treason. And what do you do when people do something like treason? You punish them. So he goes to Congress and he asks them to pass what was known as the Force Act of 1833. And what the Force Act would do, if it were passed, is it would give President Jackson the authority to invade South Carolina. Okay, so whether or not South Carolina is right or wrong here, who has a queasy feeling about invading South Carolina? You have a queasy feeling. Why does it make you queasy that you would be invading South Carolina? What's so queasy making? What? You don't like it one bit. You're not waiting one bit. So, because what is it like? A federal government invading a state is kind of like something called what? have civil war. It's not my agenda for the day. Okay. Though I did hear some people on NPR say that if someone won instead of some other person winning, that they would all bring together their guns to defend their state. So, anyway, it's at this point we've hit a level of crisis. We've got a possible civil war in the offing. And I told you before, there was somebody who this type of situation was their specialty. And remember who that person is. I called him the Great Compromiser. John Quincy Adams. What's his face? That's right, it was what's his face! How did you know? All right. It's Henry Clay, the Great Compromiser. I cannot win elections, but by golly, I can compromise. Anyway, basically what Clay proposes is known as the Compromise Tariff of 1833. And what it did is it lowered the tariff down to what it had been back in 1816. Now this date is very carefully chosen because John C. Calhoun had voted in favor of the tariff of 1816. And so it would be very hard for somebody in the South to vote against this because basically Henry Clay could say, even John C. Calhoun was in favor of this tariff. Well, Congress still is stuck with this. Do you go with the compromise? And if you go with the compromise alone, it looks like who won? The South. But do you go with passing the Force Act? Because does that still make you queasy? Still makes you queasy. So basically what Congress is going to do, they're actually going to do what I will call the smart thing. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can write it down right now. Congress does a smart thing in 1833. I do not say it often that Congress does smart things, okay, but in 1833, they did a smart thing. Anyway, they passed the Force Act and the Compromise Tariff almost simultaneously. In other words, they make sure that, hey, South Carolina, we're going to give you a way out, but you better take it. You better accept a tariff, because if you don't, the President of the United States has our authority to invade you. The resolution was basically South Carolina repealing its nullification of the tariff. But they then nullified the Force Act. The problem is, there technically wasn't anything for them to nullify because the Force Act does not go into effect if South Carolina accepts a high tariff. So in the end, who won? In some ways, you could argue the South. But did the South have to follow a higher tariff? So you could also argue the North. That's what happens with compromises. Usually you get lots of people unhappy and nobody actually thinking they won and nobody actually thinking they lost. However, let me add this one last little bit of question. Tiny thing. Guess what the first state to secede from the Union when they don't get their way in 1860 was? South Carolina. Okay. So some people argue that by not invading South Carolina and crushing them in 1833, it leads to the Civil War later. Okay. Finally, I also want to go back to, even though this was clearly about tariff, there is the slavery subtext. That basically one of the fears that South Carolina had here was that extreme central power might jeopardize the institution of slavery. Got it? All right, any questions on this? Does this kind of make sense? All right. Yes? Oh, so basically if you think of it this way, the carrot is, hey, we'll give you this special deal. Stick is, if you don't take the special deal, we'll whack you upside down. Okay? All right, second story. The second story is economics. So if you've got some sort of special, attitude that you take on when you have to think about economics, put it on right now. Okay, get that economic attitude, right? So we're going to talk about now. We call it the bank war, and the bank war is a fight. But it's a fight that is picked by a guy by the name of Henry Clay. You see, Henry Clay despises Andy Jackson. Oh my God. Okay? He just cannot believe that this guy who he thinks is just so unqualified to be president of the United States is president of the United States. And worse yet, they love him. And so basically what Henry Clay decides is that he's got to figure out a way of making this guy lose. He's got to find an issue that he can basically point out that Andy Jackson is such a loser on, that if he now then ran against Andy Jackson for president, he could win. The issue that Henry Clay picked was the Bank of the United States. The Bank of the United States, as I told you before, it was responsible for keeping the money supply relatively stable. It had the power to, if Maxine's bank overprinted money, she would be forced to show that amount of gold in her reserves, and if she couldn't, her bank could be closed. It kept inflation down. Well, the problem with Bank of the United States is that it had a charter that was going to go on for about the next 6 years. And so there's not much to fight about. What Henry Clay decides to do is recharter it early. Basically, even though it had 6 more years of life, they were going to add 10 more years on. What Clay's goal is he's hoping that Andy Jackson will veto the bill, showing himself to be completely incompetent in economic matters. That basically the hope is that Andy Jackson will go, no, I don't want this bank. And then Clay could turn around and say, look at this idiot. He wants to blow up the economy. Got it? Well, the scheme looks like it's going to go according to plan. The Congress passes the bill, and Jackson vetoes it. But Jackson's Treasury Secretary, a guy by the name of Roger Taney, is going to write an absolutely genius explanation for why President Jackson vetoed the bill. Basically, the genius of it is just simply this. Even though the bank was regulating the economy, the federal government did not have power over the bank. You see, the Bank of the United States was a public-private blend. It had the power of being the depository for federal funds, and it had this power to be able to call in gold. But the bank was controlled by private industry. And its goal being a private industry is to make what? Money. So instead of it being a government institution that is all about the people, it is a money-making operation designed to make what? The money. And it was making money. It had about an 8% profit every year. And so this thing's just driving in all these profits. Well, that money was whose money? American money. And so basically Jackson says is that We can have something else, but not this. He goes to the Jefferson